Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach new readers as a podcast host and guest. I'm excited to be joined today by my sweet friend, Kristin Faith Evans, who is a licensed master social worker, a special needs mom like me, and co-author with her husband, Todd, of the book, How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Children with Disabilities. I kept seeing Kristin pop up on podcast as a guest, and I couldn't wait to talk to her about her book, her experience with her podcast guesting strategy, and her advice on not overcommitting during your book launch. You are in for a treat today, so let's get to it. Hey, Kristin, welcome to Book Marketing Mania. I'm so thrilled you're here to serve my listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
This is so fun. So y'all heard me gush about Kristin in the introduction in her beautiful book. And Kristin, tell us about just how your book came about, how you decided to write a book about your special needs mom journey, and especially write with your husband.
Well, my husband, Todd, and I just celebrated 23 years, and it has definitely been a journey as special needs parents. And we definitely went through some very, very dark, rough patches.
Mm-hmm.
COVID actually opened the door for me to beginning to write and speak full time. Our daughter, Bethany Grace, is medically fragile, so
Uh-huh.
I had to quit work. And honestly, I started out with a different book
Yeah.
to help special needs moms, is how I started out, and
Uh-huh.
just kept hitting walls with that book with agents and editors. And my husband and I finally got to a point where we were like, how did our marriage begin to thrive? We just kept hitting walls, going to marriage counseling, nothing
Uh-huh.
helped. And we just want to help other parents not struggle and suffer like we did.
Uh-huh.
And with the research and our story and faith, we put together the additional skills that these couples need to
Yeah.
thrive. And honestly, this was the book when I pitched the idea to agents and editors. This was the one everybody was like, oh my gosh, we want this book.
Uh-huh.
So we ended up writing the book because obviously there's a need. So
Yeah. Well, I want to hear if you want to share, Kristin, what were the blocks you were running up against when you were trying to propose it as a parenting book?
well, it was actually different books that I was
Okay.
wanting. Yeah, it was books for special needs moms
Uh-huh.
in a different format. And publishers just, they're like, well, you could tweak it this way. But then they were like, do you have any other ideas? And didn't even have a proposal and just said, well, my husband and I are writing this book.
Uh-huh.
And that's the one we went with. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I still, obviously want the other books to be published. But sometimes you just have to go with what the need is and what doors open. And we're just thrilled we've been able to.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's helped my heart so much, as a special needs mom and wife. And I'm so in awe. Like I interviewed Jessica Hurlbut, which I know you were also a guest on
Mhm.
her podcast. That was a wonderful conversation. And I interviewed Jessica back on episode 143. And I was just talking to her about podcasting with her husband. Like she has a mothering book,
Mhm.
but she podcasts her with her husband. I mean, I can't imagine doing a podcast, much less writing a book with my husband. So kudos to you, Kristin, you and Todd. I mean, because it's such a blessing to me and my husband, but that's just obviously not where God has called us, I guess, or maybe we're being stubborn, but I can't even imagine what incredible work that was and the journey through it all. So yeah, I'm just so thankful. And obviously, like you say, the publisher knew there was a need. I know there's
Mhm.
a need. I mean, there's so many myths out there about marriage for special needs kids. And I know, like you said, you've been through rocky roads. So have we. Um, but I know something I wanted to ask you about and I can't remember the exact reference to this, but there's statistics out there about marriages that fall apart with special
Mhm.
needs children, right? Is that truly a big number or is it bloated at all?
So I'm a research nerd.
Yeah.
And as we were writing the book, which actually strengthened our marriage incredibly, when I hit the research of that 80% statistic that made us feel hopeless
Uh-huh.
when our daughter was little, I found the original source, which was totally unfounded.
Uh-huh.
And there's tons and tons of research on what is the divorce rate. Well, it's complicated. It's not 80%, I will say that.
Uh-huh.
It depends on so many variables, but basically what researchers have said just across the board, these marriages do face extreme stressors, which does increase the risk
Mm-hmm.
for especially marital dissatisfaction. There may not be separation or divorce, but
Mm-hmm.
just really strained, unhappy marriages, which is where we were.
Yeah.
We have up to double the risk for the
Uh-huh.
divorce rate. So that puts it at about 60-70%, but that's in extreme cases.
Uh-huh.
And the new research is focusing on the couples who do work through it and hopefully through learning these skills actually come out with stronger, more meaningful, and more intimate marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to focus on is we rewrote chapter 1 once we found this research. And we're
Yeah.
like, our marriage wasn't doomed, even though we were told it was.
Uh-huh.
And so we're trying to debunk that.
Yeah.
I think couples hear 80% and they're like, what's the point?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. And I hope a lot of our listeners that are podcast hosts, if you haven't reached out to Kristin, think about having her as a guest because I do think that's an important statistic to bring to the front of mind of your listeners because whether they have special needs children in their family or not, they probably know somebody that does. And
Mhm.
they need to know how to support them, and how to encourage that mom and dad and be able to share this as a resource. So I like to always think outside the box. And like you may not be thinking, oh, I'm going to have a special needs mom on my show to talk about this, but Kristin can bring a totally different perspective. So I want to pop that in there because I think that's so good to just always think outside the box of where our listeners are
Mhm.
at. And so again, it's just helped my heart so much. And I did want to ask you about that because I keep hearing that over and over. And I think, if I was just now getting the diagnosis, like my son has autism, if I was just getting that diagnosis and I knew that statistic, I would be just so bummed, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
such a hard transition, but then like to think, oh my gosh, now my marriage is going to tumble or whatever. And we just celebrate our 28th anniversary, Kristin. So
Oh,
kudos to both of us that we have
congratulations.
stayed in
Yes.
marriages and thank God. I mean, definitely give
Mhm.
him all the glory, right?
Mhm.
I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
imagine, especially if you didn't have a faith-filled marriage,
I know.
where it would be. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, I'm just obviously so excited. So let's talk about you being a first-time author, right? This is your first book, Kristin?
I co-wrote a children's book a decade ago,
Okay.
but this was what I'm calling really my first big, book launch.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about that then being a quote unquote first time traditionally published author for sure. What has worked well for you or you and Todd together to market your book?
Yeah, podcast interviews
Uh-huh.
has been instrumental in marketing our book. And it's actually worked really well for us and our audience.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to travel and even speak locally because it's hard on our daughter, Bethany Grace.
Yeah.
But podcast interviews, we can both come in here for an hour, have fun, um, get to empower, audiences.
Hmm.
And it just has worked really, really well for us.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking at conferences, we've been selective
Uh-huh.
at where we go, and it's usually very targeted to the disability
Uh-huh.
community, either parents or couples or church ministries. That's worked well, especially for selling books at a table and giving
Yeah.
away free resources. That has been instrumental in connecting with churches. Writing guest blog posts has
Uh-huh.
worked well. Writing articles for magazines. And we've had to expand our audience a little bit with that to just general marriage articles.
Uh-huh.
And I would say Reels on Instagram and obviously all the platforms has been instrumental
Uh-huh.
in promoting our book and just posting personal pics of us with the book
Oh
and
yeah.
and posts that those things have worked really well.
Yeah, yeah. I bet and seeing your daughter too, in the pictures, I love that so much. I really do commend you too for that, Kristin, just being vulnerable and being able to share because that means a lot to me. Like I see her and I'm like, I can totally relate to that. That is my life, and it just means so much to me. So yeah, everything you're doing is so amazing. So I know I invited you on this show and didn't mean to exclude Todd, but I did. But do you and Todd typically do your interviews together?
With this book launch, yes. I had started out a couple years ago. He had done a couple of individual ones, but mostly I started out doing all the interviews.
Mhm.
And we've mostly done them together. Now he's done a couple separate ones on Dad's podcasts,
Yeah.
and I've done a couple separate ones like this.
Uh-huh.
But with this launch, we probably did, oh gosh, maybe 20 podcast interviews
Uh-huh.
together.
Yeah. And do y'all usually speak together? Like if you go speak at a disabilities conference or something like that, do y'all speak together?
Usually. Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. I know that I saw you posted, I can't remember what conference it was at, but I know you posted recently, or maybe it was since your book launch, that you were at something. Because I remember sharing it with our ministry at church, and I was just like, "Oh gosh, everybody's going!" Or I don't know if they had virtual events too, but I know that we like to share resources in our Facebook group for our church. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's just so fun. So, what would you say for some of our listeners? Like whether they have the book in hand or not, but they're a little anxious about being a podcast guest. Any tips you would share with them?
I would say get started now
Mhm.
and just maybe find some that are a really good fit
Mhm.
and reach out now and start trying to line up those interviews to
Mhm.
record at least a month before the book launches. And I would definitely say don't wait.
Yeah, yeah,
just you know, be courageous, put yourself out there. And then once you get that ball rolling, you get a couple podcast interviews, then doors will start to open up. And so I encourage authors just to put their foot out there.
uh-huh,
God's given them a message,
yeah,
especially, nonfiction authors.
mhm,
And speaking was not on my radar
uh-huh,
at all.
yeah,
And but once you get into it, it's fun and you get to share your message. So I'd say get out there, start connecting, pitching, get those lined up.
yeah, yeah, that's such great advice, and it's so fun, right? But it can be nerve-wracking until, like, you get those first couple under your belt, like what you're
Mhm.
saying, and it is so interesting, the snowball effect, like, once you get
Mhm.
out there and you start, getting visible, that the requests do start coming in, and
Yep.
so you don't have to pitch as much. And I'm just so blown
Right.
away by how cool that it works that way. Well, you kind of talked about a little bit about this. I did want to ask you, some tips in general, Kristen. So looking back on things like, do you wish you would have started just marketing period earlier? Because I know, especially working with a traditional publisher, they have a set time frame that they typically
Mhm.
work with the author. And I know it's getting a little bit earlier and earlier than when I used to work with publishers. But do you have any tips for authors that, they may be looking like, okay, next fall is my book launch with a traditional
Mhm.
publisher. What could I be doing now? Like, what do you look back on and wish I would have started sooner?
I thought we were starting really early. And I
Hmm.
feel like we did, but we
Yeah.
just started earlier. And I wish we had started even months earlier. So I'd say
Uh-huh.
get started now, whether that's as soon as the cover's ready, whether you're traditional or hybrid or self
Uh-huh.
publishing, as soon as the cover's ready, the book may not be. You
Hmm.
may not have the book, but get a mock cover on
Hmm.
a book and get a professional headshot with
Oh,
the book.
yeah. Great
I
idea.
cannot tell you how many times we have used that,
Uh-huh.
especially for podcast interviews. When they
Yeah.
want a headshot, you've got that professional photo. And we did
Uh-huh.
ours, you never know it, but we did ours with a mock cover.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
yes, get video of that photo session. I mean, we have used that so much. It's a
Uh-huh.
little pricey, but it's so worth it for
Yeah.
marketing. I would say also get a book trailer
Uh-huh.
with a mock cover if you have to. The book trailer, it can get pricey, but we finally found a reasonable
Yeah.
videographer.
Uh-huh.
I'd say those 2 things as soon as you can, get those going. Um, we also did some blog posts. We did a series on marriage challenges. We made some freebie opt-ins that were kind of teasers for the book
Mhm. Yeah.
really early, freebies to opt in, like download this worksheet of
Uh-huh.
10 things you can say to each other and just kind of putting it out there even 9 months before
Uh-huh.
the book was going to launch. So I would say definitely that. Do a blog series, start doing giveaways even before they can pre order. Just be creative, just start getting the idea out there, plant the seed. The book is coming, it's a year, but
Uh-huh.
so I would say definitely start now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. And I think so many people wait, because you do feel like you have to have
Mhm,
the book in hand. But like what you're saying, you
mhm,
don't. You can do something really beautiful with your mock up. And, I can imagine people are like, oh gosh, videographer costs so much money for a trailer. But you can always barter with people,
mhm,
or you might just have somebody that was going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. You just
mhm.
never know until you ask people. So I love that because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about trailers anymore. So I'm so glad you brought that up, and just a way to kind of tease people. And like you mentioned before about writing articles on just like general marriage, even though your book was targeting special
Mhm,
needs parents, I think that's so important. Again, it's like that think outside the box
mhm,
mentality of, I'm a special needs parent, yes, special needs wife, but I read articles, just about marriage. So you just never
mhm.
know where your target audience is and how you can reach them through those topics. And yeah, that's so good. So since you've been guesting on lots of podcasts, have y'all thought about starting your own podcast, Kristen? I have to ask.
So that is a fun question. We would love to do a video podcast series,
Oh, yeah.
um, like a YouTube teaching video
Uh
series.
huh.
We have thought through that, and our conclusion is, how are we going to spend our time
Mm-hmm.
and resources? And for us, like you said, just they do a phenomenal job
Uh
with their
huh.
podcast.
Yeah.
Um, we've decided to invest our time in being on other people's podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that way, we've been in different audiences like the homeschooling
Uh
special
huh.
needs
Oh,
community, the foster
yeah.
care community, church ministry podcasts. And that way, we're getting our message out there and we can use our time and resources in different ways. So we
Yeah.
would love to, but we've decided that's just not for us right now.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you know your priorities. You know what I mean? And like you're seeing the fruits of your labor through the guesting. So you don't feel like you need to do the hosting. So yeah, I love hosting a podcast, but I don't think it's for everybody,
Mhm.
and just like, but some people would rather host than guest. And I
Right.
think you want to do both, I mean, I think if you're a
Mhm.
host, you definitely want to guest on other people's shows. And yeah, I'm just so glad to see that I see your name pop up on a lot of the podcasts I listen to. And is this, you feel like it's worthwhile, and that you've seen
Mhm.
traction with it. So what's next on the horizon? So you have a series of books that you're wanting to get published, right? Are you going to self-publish those?
I have a phenomenal agent. I feel like the Lord has blessed me so much.
Uh-huh.
I keep hitting walls.
Yeah.
I have three books right now. They've all gone to a pub board and they come back with it's too niche. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
but this audience needs this book. It's,
Yeah.
for disability parents in different
Uh-huh.
areas. Um, I feel like those books are really needed.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to keep pursuing that.
Yeah.
And one is for marriage counselors,
Mhm.
research based for how to help these couples. Another one
Yeah.
is the coping skills, the seven faith and mental health coping skills.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm going to keep pursuing that. I'm going through a season of, Lord, the doors just keep not opening.
Uh-huh.
But I'm trying to be patient, trying to trust in the Lord's timing. And yeah, pursuing that. In the meantime, continuing to speak and write articles.
Uh-huh.
I'd say one thing that hasn't worked well is
Oh, yeah,
overcommitting.
thank you. I wanted to ask you that too, Kristen. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So tell our listeners what
Uh,
hasn't worked well for you.
yeah, so overcommitting. I was
Yeah.
thinking through this.
Yeah.
Um, you know, writing articles for people, either pitching or offering to, that has stressed me out.
Uh-huh.
And they're great periodicals and blogs.
Uh-huh.
But the launch just was so much more massive than I could have imagined. It
Yeah.
just was overwhelming, and we did most of it ourselves.
Uh-huh.
So I'd say definitely don't take on and commit to more than you can really commit to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that hasn't worked well. Getting reviews has been the biggest struggle, and I know
Uh-huh.
it is for all authors, and I think our
Yeah.
audience in general doesn't have time to write reviews. That has not worked well,
Uh-huh.
and so I'm gonna have to learn how to do that for my next book launch.
Yeah.
Um, the designed promo images, that are beautiful about the
Mhm.
book, they just aren't as popular.
Yeah.
And so trying to steer away from those more because that hasn't worked as well.
Uh-huh.
And then, we've had to choose, like I said, where we spend our time.
Mhm.
So we actually ended up not doing any bookstore signings or events or things like that.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of felt bad. I was like, is our publisher going to be upset? And I was like, well, we spend our time, at conferences where our audience
Right.
is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we didn't really try them, but
Uh-huh.
that was kind of just, thinking about your audience. So those are the things that did not work well. I would say definitely don't just speak on every podcast or show that invites
Uh-huh.
you.
Mhm.
Vet it, make sure it's a good fit, and don't overcommit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such great advice because I know we have that glaring release date in front of us, and you feel like you have to do everything around that date,
Hmm.
right? Like that's just when it all has to happen to have this huge successful launch, which of course that in itself is different for everybody. But
Hmm.
but yeah, don't you realize like after that's over, like you just like wear yourself out. And then after it's over and you're like, wait, I still got to market this book. Like it's not over. Like you do, if there's more
It's
people to reach,
never
right?
over.
And so, yeah, you do have to kind of pace yourself, and that's so, so hard to do, but you do have to do that for sure. And yeah, especially as mom. And I hate to say that. I mean, I know everybody has different things in their
Hmm.
families. We're all pressed for time, and we all, need to spend it as wisely as we can. And I know that's what God wants us to do, and He's called us here for a reason. And we just have to, be obedient and take time to listen to what that is. And that's preaching to myself about all that, Kristen. So but that's such a great reminder just not to wear yourself out because it's not any
Hmm.
fun when you do that, and then you're not helping people if you don't have the
Right.
energy. So, yeah, that's so good.
Hmm.
Well, this has been so wonderful. Well, tell everybody where they can connect with you and learn more about your book and your resources that you have for families.
Yes. So our website is disabilityparenting.com. We like to create lots of professional free resources, workbooks, worksheets, just easy 3 ways to connect with God in your busy day. You
Hmm.
can download all that for free. You can read the first chapter of the book for free. All subscribers get that. And then our book is available pretty much anywhere books and ebooks are sold.
Okay.
So Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, Baker Books, and follow us on Instagram. We're Disability Parenting. Would love to just hear from you, know how I can help support you. My author website is also KristinFaithEvans.com, and I do have a couple articles there for authors
Oh,
and
good. Yeah.
about platform and just a couple articles there to help support authors.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. See, again, I think that's like thinking outside the box, right? How much support you can provide to somebody else that's looking to do
Mhm.
that, especially like me. Like I thought about writing about my special needs journey, and I imagine there's lots of other parents out there thinking the same thing. And it's like we need somebody to kind of guide us through the path. So, yeah, I'm so thankful of all the ways that God's using you, Kristen, and I'm just so excited. So I can't wait for my listeners to hear this and be encouraged with this episode. And I just thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Oh, y'all, I just love Kristen's heart. And as a future first time author myself this year, just putting it out there, keeping it real, y'all, so y'all keep me accountable. I was taking notes like crazy. And I hope if you have parents tuning into your own show, you might remember Kristen as a potential guest to serve them because the marriage struggle is real and we need all the encouragement we can get and can give to our friends who have children with special needs. Thanks for tuning in today. You know it means the world to me. And as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.